Okay, so for this week, first we have our language plans. So there seems to be a big interest in story writing and in dialogue and stuff because some students are moving towards wanting to create like some comic strips and things like that. So this week I'm looking at a couple different things. One, I'd like a mini lesson on brainstorming for a story. I've pulled some books on writing and reading that kind of act as some provocations, and even for brainstorming for a comic strip I've got some different comics as well, so that can kind of be little provocations for them. I'm hoping to do some little stuff on how you might brainstorm and what that might look like. And then another one on taking the ideas and beginning to actually do the writing. And that's when we can also look at, how might a story start so that they can come up with some different beginnings of the story. How might it end? The whole like problem solution piece, which is another piece that I want to get into, because to make the story richer, we really need to have the problem and the solution. So how are we going to deal with that? And then again, because the story and the comic piece lends itself well to editing, looking a little bit at the spelling and the use of the sight words, the popcorn words, the leaving of the spaces in between the words, and the punctuation to put capitals, periods, question marks, all of that, and capitalization, I guess, should go in there too. And then the dialogue piece. So what are some things that people could say to each other? And this might be where we could actually add a drama part for the oral language, followed by the actual written dialogue. So taking what's said orally and turning it into writing. So now we've got the idea for science. And so this is just our special things for science and social studies. I didn't really get to those two things for last week as separate. It was integrated in, but not separate between some of the other things that were going on. So I do want to look at generating some questions for inquiry, as well as in social studies at relooking at the questions. Two of my students from last year are hopefully going to Skype in and help us with a simple challenge game to help students see how they could rephrase their questions to make them a little bit richer, and then we can move towards doing some of the research to find out more information. And then this last one is going to be done when I'm away on Wednesday and Thursday, and I think I will probably leave it for Thursday, but looking at the idea of the Remembrance Day and the poppy, and actually looking at first for a shared reading in terms of reading the actual poem that we're going to be performing, and making poppies to act as making poppies as well, but having students do some research on what the poppy might look like, and then moving from there to the actual creation of the poppy and the wreath part, so that we can kind of look at what that might actually entail and do it more as a little bit of an inquiry and exploration in terms of size and line and even color and how it goes together and things like that. So for math this week on Monday, I've kind of got a musical jar provocation that I'm going to leave as language initially, in terms of hopefully maybe even moving towards writing some songs. But also in math as eventually into the non-standard units of measurement, and link at how the water level impacts on the actual sound that's made, so that they can kind of see both. I also want to look at the measurement provocations. So Christy gave me the hugging the tree photograph, and I'd like to look at that up on the smart board, and then go outside and kind of experiment with putting our hands around and how many people are around the tree, and how much bigger is the other tree as compared to that one, and are all the trees the same size around, and in terms of getting a feel for how big the tree is and how big an area it is. So why does it matter? And that's why we maybe need why does it matter. So, if we were to look at the size of the tree that was in the picture, could that tree actually put into our schoolyard, and where might that have been able to go? And look at the number of trees that may be clumped together within a schoolyard, and how does it impact if the trees are bigger or smaller, so they kind of get a feel from that. And have an idea that all of them are around the same size, so when they grow up, then they're going to be growing together, and that whole kind of concept. So again, looking at why it might be reasonable, and then some ones in the classroom as well, looking at things like chairs around a table, children around a carpet, how many people, how many things, how can we figure out how big it is there enough room for, if we invited 2 classes, for everybody to be able to sit, if a third class came in. So kind of give them some questions and let them experiment with how they're going to figure that piece out. So on Tuesday, we're going to have the bocce ball one to measure, use the measurement to determine the winner and who's closest. And Frank is going to introduce that to the students on Monday so that they understand how to play the game before we actually look at it from a math perspective. So then I'm away then on Wednesday and Thursday. So on Wednesday for my supply teacher, and it's 2 different ones, we're going to look at the Lego and block structures that can take up the room on a given shelf. And even though this piece maybe goes more towards the concept of area and how to fill it up and how many can we put and how big can they be and everything else, and can everything fit and what will we have to change to make them all work, etc., etc. Even though that part goes with the area, the actual combining of making something will go with the idea of this Dunsiger's toy store. Now, just thinking ahead, I've put this down for Thursday. This could actually be for Thursday, or it could be for Friday, depending, because I need to look at the idea of the poppies, because I think the poppies might take a little bit longer than I have in the other little block, especially with the research part. So I may actually look at the concept of shapes with that, even though it's not exactly measurement. We can look at the link to measurement when we look at the idea of filling the wreath. So the poppy part may become a different little provocation piece here, which will again still tie up here into the concept of area. So that could go possibly for Thursday. And then I may end up doing this part on Friday. I have to think this one through as I do my plans for the toy store, where what we would do is the students are going to need to create a boat, a car, some kind of action figure that will move the farthest distance with the use of wind energy. And I'm going to bring in a blow dryer. And I'm going to send out an email about recyclables. I've already sent one to the staff, so I'll put it in for the ones on parents too. And then they can use anything that's available in the classroom, test it out and make changes, and measure around each time to determine what's the best measuring tool to use, what's the best non-standard measurement option to use there. Okay, so this one for distance. This distance one may make its way on Friday, or I'm thinking it could become Monday of the following week if we do the poppy one as done. But it is good because it still combines with the concept of distance. And we'll look at the fire routes and the map of the school and the information to include on it. So this also goes into a social studies little connection too, and the actual like visual, like the spatial piece. How do we outline that on a piece of paper? Directional sense, left, right, up, down, that kind of directional sense piece from there. And also looking at initially maybe going outside and look at the number of steps to get to different places in the playground. Look at maybe the best measurement option. So are steps always the best? What else could we do? That could be where we get into things like lengths of string. We can also look for the step option at pedometers, and we can borrow them from phys ed. So I will speak to Frank about borrowing them because he did mention that as well. And the other thing is when parents come in, if they're coming in, then they can, I want them to explore with us on some measurement. Now, depending on where we're at, if we do the Thursday activity on Friday, they may be there for part of the testing piece, or they may be there for this other piece, which I wouldn't mind them exploring together. So one of the standard pieces of measurement, the only standard one that actually goes into grade 1, is looking at what's less than or about a meter. So understanding this the length or the height, I guess, of a meter. So giving students, letting them kind of compare objects that would be not as tall as a meter, taller than a meter, what would kind of fit, and looking around and kind of exploring, making as to how are you going to actually represent this on paper again. So this can go back to Christy's good question from last year or last week about how do you represent on paper what they've done, and then parents can kind of experiment with us and do part of the sharing session with us at the end.